As many of you know, if you've been around here very long, you know I have Sunday mornings, I kind of have a routine, okay? Part of my routine is, number one, I get here about 6 o'clock in the morning. And then when I do, one of the, it's kind of my goal is to start, going through my message, getting ready for the message, getting ready for the day, and then also trying to get, the church ready for everybody else as they start rolling in. But one of the things that is always part of my routine is I always have a time of prayer. Now, it doesn't always happen in the same place. Sometimes it's just I have some prayer, I sit at my desk. There's other times when it's a little bit different. This morning, to be honest, I pulled up, I parked, I turned on my lights, my brights, and I looked at the crosses, and I just sat in my car. I listened to Jeremy Camp, Christ Did Me, and then I hit the button as soon as it was over, bowed my head, and spent some time in prayer. Sometimes, I'll be honest, I come in here and I turn on the crosses, one row of lights, and I sit right up here on the front row and I pray. I've also got a round table in my office that is, it's different than my desk, and sometimes I will just sit there. And, the reason I kind of say that, is that what is it that is so special about those places? Is there anything special about praying in the sanctuary or praying when I'm looking at the crosses? And the answer is no. Okay, there's nothing that is, special, or, there's no high-speed conduit between the sanctuary and heaven. And, I don't know that, when I pray in my truck, you're looking at the crosses, that it makes my prayers any more effective or any more heard. It's just, it is not God that is changed by those places, it's me, okay? And what I mean is that it's my attitude is a little bit different. When I do that, it's different than just, stopping at a normal time to pray. When I come and I sit here, my attitude is a little bit different. When I'm staring at the crosses, with just black sky behind it, my attitude is a little bit different. And so it's not that God that changes, it's me that kind of changes a little bit. And the reason that I bring this up, we're going through our series in Hebrews that's called Greater Than. And I know that you and I, by and large, we understand there's nothing special about praying in here compared to praying, anywhere else. But I think sometimes we need to be reminded of that, because we kind of assign, for lack of I hate to say power, but we kind of feel like things are different. And the reason that I bring that up is because as we read this book, this letter of Hebrews, in many ways, we find first century Hebrew Christians who are struggling with some of the same things. Because what you've got to keep in mind is, if you go back and you read the Old Testament, what do you find in the Old Testament? There were very specific, all of the worship, all of the sacrifices, everything that went through it was very, very specific. It was specific about, how you do it, the order you do it, the place you do it, down to the clothes that you wear when you do it. And every bit of that was not about the fact that it made the sacrifices any more effective. It didn't make the prayers any more effective or heard. What it did was, it was a reminder to the people, okay? Always a reminder to the people to keep them focused upon the God of creation, to keep them away from idolatry. That's why they were to worship in one place. They're living in a society and a culture which was surrounded by temples and idols of all of these other gods. And so when God says, no, you're going to do it here, it was so that they would be focused on Him and not on what was going on in the culture. When He said that it is to be done this way, boom, so specific, it was not that it somehow made the sacrifice different. It was a testimony to the people of the holiness of God, the exactness of God, that you do it exactly this way. And so that was the purpose of it. And the reason that that's important is that now you've got a group of Hebrew Christians who they were raised in that. Now they're believers in Jesus, and they're being told, you don't have to go there. You don't have to do it in this order, okay? And they're in a difficult time. Well, in those difficult times, isn't it easy to go back to what we've always known? Okay? I mean, let's be absolutely honest. You watch movies, and we probably do it the same. In times of real difficulty, you ever see people where they go to a church to pray? Couldn't do it somewhere else? No, I'm sorry. I wasn't saying you got to speak up and answer. I was just, but I mean, you think about it sometimes, you're like, okay, what's the difference between doing that in your house? Okay, there's not. But sometimes we see something special. We see something different about this place. And so that's what you have, is you've got a group of these Hebrew Christians in the first century that they see, we always did this. We always did it that way. They found comfort, they found strength and encouragement in those things. I mean, imagine this. Imagine January 1st, 2025 comes along, and the way you worship, the order that you worship, the place you worship, even some of the things regarding your worship all change, and you've got to do them differently on January 1st, 2025. It would be easy. It would be difficult, wouldn't it? But it would be very easy to then start to slip back into what you had done before, especially when things got difficult, okay? Because old habits die hard. I mean, they really do. They're comfortable. There's a reason for that. And so that is one of the reasons that the writer of Hebrews, I believe, he worked so systematically of laying this out for these believers, that what they were now worshiping and the way they were worshiping, more likely who they were worshiping, was greater than what they had come from. Okay, and we've learned that Jesus is greater than the angels. We learned that Jesus is greater than Moses. Today, what we're digging into is the fact that Jesus is greater than Aaron, greater than the high priest, okay? And so we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4, go ahead, and if you want to turn there, like I said, we're going to be reading a lot, so I'm not going to have it up on the screen. Hebrews chapter 4. And like I said, we're going to kind of be reading through that, so you know, when you get there, you could look up. But yeah, get out your phone, get out your iPad, get out your paper Bible. We're going to be exploring Jesus and his superiority, his superior priesthood. Okay? Everybody there? Hebrews 4? Okay. Hebrews chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 9. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from his own work, just as God did from his. Let us, therefore, make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will fall by following their example of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and the attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Therefore, since we have such a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among men and is appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. That is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people. No one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron was. So Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest. But God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So how was, as we read this, how was Jesus greater than Aaron and then the high priest? How was his priesthood superior to their priesthood? And I think there's kind of four arguments. You know, if you want to look at it, they all go together, but there's four. The first one is that Jesus was superior in his title, okay? What we know is that Aaron was a high priest. And there was a line that descended from Aaron. The high priest descended from the line of Aaron. But there is only one who could carry and fill the title that Jesus was given, and that is of our great high priest. Our great high priest. And one of the reasons, and I'm going to teach you a couple of really cool terms today that maybe you'll like them, maybe you won't. But one of the reasons, there is a doctrine in Christianity, and what it is, it tells us, we've talked about this, Jesus is fully human and he is fully God. And as such, there's none like him. There is no one who could fill the role that he fulfills. And like I said, there's a term for it, okay? We're going to be talking about it today. There's two of them. The first one it's called the hypostatic union. The hypostatic union. And what the hypostatic union tells us is that Jesus is at the same time one person with two natures. Fully human, fully God. He is not a man who became a God. He's not a God who became a man. He's not half God, half man. He is fully human and fully God. Two natures in one at the same time. And the reason this is really important is not just so that you've got a neat thing to throw out as a trivia question at parties. It really is. It's something that plays out really big as we go through today, but also next week's message as well. The fact is that because Jesus, God took on human form in the person of Jesus, that is what allows him to lay claim to the fact that he is our great high priest. You think about this, the high priest was a priest for a time. Jesus is our great high priest for all time. The high priest ministered in an earthly tabernacle, whereas Jesus today is enthroned in the heavenly tabernacle, seated upon the throne. The temple on earth was a representation of heaven, but Jesus ministers in heaven. He is, there is no earthly high priest who could ever fulfill the role and the title that Jesus has as our great high priest. And so, the first is we know that he's greater than Aaron. He is superior to the high priest. So he is superior in his title. The next, he's superior in his ordination. November 18th, 2007, I was ordained as a minister of Christ. I got a certificate. It's the first thing that got hung in my office. Okay, but I also know that after I had got here to Antioch, one of the things that I needed to do was I had to take that certificate and I had to go over and I took it to Beckham County to the courthouse and I had to register my credentials so that I would be able to do weddings. And so that was in 2008. And if you go to book 4, page 18, you will find my credentials. That's where they are. Okay. But what they were is they're so that I then gave me in their eyes, the authority to do weddings. And so what that means is that, when it comes to that time, when I get and I say, I pronounce you husband and wife by the power vested in, or the authority that is given to me, by the state of Oklahoma, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Which, and just to clarify, that's the husband and wife, and that's the option that we have, and that is it. Okay, that is how God designed us, and that is how it will always be. So even if I don't get to do ceremonies by the power vested in me by the state of Oklahoma, by the power vested in me by the gospel of Jesus Christ, I will pronounce people husband and wife. But I just say that because, that is an authority that's given to me. If you don't have that, you can't do it. And all states are different, okay? And that's one of those unique things. If you ever do a wedding somewhere else in another state, then you got to figure out, oh my goodness, what do I need to do to have the authority to be able to do that? And so, but that is something that it is given by the state. And the reason I say is because what we know is that Jesus is greater than any other high priest by the authority that was vested in him by God. It's the reason that when we read the Great Commission is what does he tell us in Matthew 28 verse 19? The first thing before he ascends, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. And he continues. The Apostle Paul in Philippians, he is writing about the attitude of Jesus in the same way in Philippians 2. And you get to verses 9 and 10, and it says, therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. He has an ordination and he has authority beyond what any high priest. In fact, as we read, I don't know if you guys noticed, if you've ever gone back, you can read the passage that we went through. But in 5:5, in Hebrews 5:5, the writer quotes, he actually quotes Psalm 2. And Psalm 2 is a messianic psalm. It was looking forward to Jesus. But what we read, though, is that and it talks about his ordination. Hebrews 5:5, it says, so Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest. And hear this. But God said to him, and here's the quote, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Now, depending on your translation, sometimes it says, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. But here's the thing to understand. That prophecy in Psalms is not about Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. It is about his resurrection in Jerusalem. Okay? When he says, I have become your father, today I have begotten you. Jesus was begotten into a glorious new life in his resurrection. He ascended to heaven in a glorified body to become our great high priest seated at the throne of grace. Think about this, when Aaron was ordained as a high priest, God didn't directly say it to him. God did directly speak to Jesus and declared His priesthood. There's a couple of things. One, we talk about this. Jesus is a priest forever. There's no Old Testament high priest who could do that, because they would all die. They would die, and then a successor would be called. And so, in Hebrews, we read this, and so many times the eternal, the forever nature of it is mentioned. 6 times he uses the word forever in this letter. And so what we know is that because Jesus is our great high priest forever, he gives his people salvation forever. Okay, no high priest on earth could do that. The second is that Jesus belongs to a different order than the Old Testament priests. They belong to the order of Aaron. Okay, they were all the line of Aaron. Jesus did not. Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And we're going to get into Melchizedek, honestly, more next week. Excuse me. I will say this. I believe that Melchizedek is what they call a Christophany. He is a pre-incarnate, in other words, before he was born, he is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, okay, a Christophany. The reason I say that is you look at Melchizedek, there is no record of a priesthood that leads to Melchizedek. There is none then that follows after him. Okay? He appears, we know that he is without genealogy, that he is without father or mother, no beginning or end of days. Okay? Now, Aaron was of the tribe of Levi. Jesus, on the other hand, was of the seed of David. He was of the tribe of Judah. And so he came, though, as a sacrifice on earth so that he might become our high priest in heaven. And like I said, we're going to get into Melchizedek later on, but because of this, we know that Jesus' authority, that his ordination is greater than that of the high priest. We know that his priesthood is superior to that of the earthly high priest as well. The third one, he has superior sympathy. The Old Testament high priests were men, and they were held to a higher standard, but let's be honest, they were still sinful men. Okay, they were still going to sin. They offered sacrifices for the people who were ignorant and wayward. Their open rebellion, no, they didn't do that. This was for when they were ignorant, when they were wayward, that there were sacrifices offered for them. And so they were to have sympathy for those that they represented before God, because in the same way they were sinners as well. Okay, in fact, they offered a sacrifice of blood not only for the people who had sinned in their ignorance, but for themselves who had sinned in their ignorance. And the reason I say greater sympathy is you would think that being sinner themselves, they would have greater empathy for other sinners, but let's be honest, sin tends to make us selfish. It makes us blind many times to the hurts of others. It can make us hard-hearted. It makes us judgmental rather than being sympathetic. And Eli, when Hannah came, Hannah was praying. She's praying fervently. And Eli, the high priest, comes and accuses her of being drunk. Okay? Even King David, when Nathan comes to him and is telling him about the sin of the rich man who took the family's little lamb. I mean, David is just absolutely incensed until he finds out that he himself is the rich man. The thing is that so many times I think it requires a really spiritual-minded person with a clean heart to be able to truly sympathize and to help other sinners. As human beings, we have a hard time with this. Yeah, we have a hard time with it. Okay, Jesus did not. That's why the writer Hebrews in 4:16, he says, "Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. To receive mercy is to receive what we do not deserve for all that we've done. That's just not to receive what we do deserve for everything that we have done. Whereas to find grace is to receive what we do not deserve, all because of what Jesus has done. Okay? Mercy is not getting what we deserve for what we've done. Grace is getting what we don't deserve because of what Jesus has done. And Hebrews here tells us that we are to approach the throne of grace with confidence to receive mercy for us when we're in our time of need. You know, when we think of the Garden of Gethsemane, we know that Jesus went and he prayed in the garden. And a lot of times I think when we do, we tend to focus on the words, that are said that Jesus is praying, that if there is any way that this cup could pass from me, let it be, but if not, your will be done. But Jesus prayed for hours, okay? And I think that's the part that we focus on. But as I was reading here in Hebrews, it says that during his days of his life on earth, and it would include the garden, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. All throughout his ministry, do you understand this? Jesus' heart broke. Jesus' heart broke for those who were lost, those who couldn't see him for who he was, those who would not follow. And I believe that night in the garden, he cried out to God on our behalf as well. And his prayers were heard because of his submission, because of his surrender to the plan of God. Was it Matthew West sings the song, "With Me on Your Mind"? You did all of this. I think it was done with me on your mind. Even in the darkest of days, Jesus was thinking of us. And he was willing to make himself nothing so that we could receive everything. The story is told, Charles Spurgeon, he, in the earlier days and then even into his ministry when it became successful, he was, the other clergy were jealous of him. Okay, and the fact that, he was successful, he was doing well, it made them jealous. So as a result, they would tell lies about him. They tried to discredit him. They tried to embarrass him, even to the point of writing up articles in the paper. There was even a Christian newspaper that wrote articles about him to discredit and defame him. And there was one that was a particularly slanderous report, and it's in the press. And afterwards, Spurgeon goes back and he prays, and these were his words. He says, "O Lord Jesus, thou didst make thyself of no reputation for me. I willingly lay my reputation down for thy sake." What Spurgeon knew was that his great high priest understood his needs. And so that was where he went for the grace, the ability to do what needs to be done in the moment, for the moment. That was where he turned in his time of need. And so it is Jesus' sympathy for us that makes him superior to, which makes him greater than any of the whole Old High Testament priests. And then the last is the superior sacrifice. And I told you earlier, I threw out a word, and it was the hypostatic union, okay? Two natures in one, fully human, fully God. That in and of itself would set Jesus apart from anybody or anyone or anything else. But there's another one here. There's a really cool Latin word that I'm gonna teach you today, okay? Communicato idiomatum. Communicato idiomatum. It is the communication of properties. And this is a doctrine that just goes hand in hand with the hypostatic union, and especially as what we are talking about today. Because not only does it mean that Jesus has two natures, okay, fully human, fully God, but it also means that all of the attributes of his divinity and his humanity exist in one person, but this also means that the properties of the divinity and the humanity exist in the one person of Jesus. And I know that it's confusing, but here's what it does mean. The person of Jesus can exhibit the attributes, the properties of divinity, okay? Omniscience, omnipotence, all-knowing, all-powerful. At the same time, he can exhibit all of the properties of humanity. Growing, walking, talking, hunger, pain, all of that at the same time. It's communication of properties. And so this is where this applies to us, and I think into the passage is when you and I sin, we sin against an infinitely holy God. How can I ever appease an infinite and infinitely holy God when we ourselves are finite and unholy? We can't. Ever. We can't do it. The only one who could appease God, the only one whom could ever offer a sacrifice that is sufficient to satisfy an infinitely holy God is God. The only one. Okay? And for that reason, the Word, Jesus, God became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Now, on the cross, we have Jesus dying. And here's one of the things to understand. Did his divine nature die? No. And this is where the communication of property. I know it's, like I said, it's a funky word, and you're kind of like, I have no clue what difference this makes. This is where it comes into play. When Jesus died on the cross, his divine nature did not die because God is eternal. God cannot die. But his humanity, his human body died. And through the communicato idiomatum, through the communication of properties, it teaches us that the qualities and the attributes of the divine nature were ascribed to the person of Jesus. Okay? So even though the divine side of Jesus didn't die, the person of Jesus did. And so the person of Jesus was able to claim the divine attributes of God as his own. And that's what makes the death of Jesus, his sacrifice, okay? That's what makes it infinitely valuable and eternally sufficient. And now you know a really cool word that you can tell people. But that is what, because of that, because of the fact that he was fully human, fully God, because he had all of the attributes, all of the properties that they were communicated. Because I don't know if you've ever had that question. I'm like, oh, but God's eternal. He can't die. Well, God, the divine nature did not, but the human nature did. But because of the communication of properties, when Jesus died there, he was attributed all of the attributes of the divinity. And so therefore, that is why his sacrifice is unlike any other sacrifice that ever could have been offered. That is why his sacrifice is eternally sufficient. And it is the only sacrifice that is sufficient, all sufficient, for the forgiveness of our sins and the sins of mankind. You know, and as we look at these arguments, you look at those of his superior priesthood in his title, in his ordination or authority, okay, in his sympathy, and also in his sacrifice. It's hard to argue. that he's anything less than our great high priest, that he is not greater than, that he is not superior to anything else. And the reason I say is because we look at this and we wonder, how in the world would those Hebrew Christians go back to that? They come out of the sacrifices, and they came out of a manly priest that they went to, an earthly human priesthood, and now they've been introduced to Jesus, our great high priest. They have all of this before them. Why would they want to go back to what they had known before? We may not be tempted to go back to Judaism, but we really got to ask ourselves the same question. Because when we know all of that, when we know that the author and perfecter of our faith is greater than the angels, that he is greater than Moses, that he is greater than the high priest, why would we turn back to anything else? Why would we be tempted to go back to our old life? In John, there's a story that I love, and it breaks my heart. Jesus is teaching, and he's introducing the people to some really difficult teachings. And probably one of the most heartbreaking verses in all the Bible is John 6:66. And it says there that then some of his disciples turned away and did not follow him anymore. People that were following him turned their back because it was too hard to hear. But then Jesus turns to the 12 and he says, "What about you? Are you going to leave me as well?" And I hope, I know these are words that I cling to. I really do. This is something that I find myself telling myself. It is things that I find myself praying and just hanging on to, or Simon's words when he speaks for the group, and basically he says, where else are we going to go? He said, you have the words of eternal life. We know and we believe that you are the one and only Son of God. Where else are we going to go? Where else are we going to turn? I hope that that's your attitude today. I know that there are difficult things we're all going to walk into. And there are times when it is going to be so easy to turn back around and go to the things that used to bring us comfort, the things that used to bring us encouragement. It's easy to fall back into religion for the sake of religion. It's easy to fall back into routines for the sake of routines. It's so easy to fall back into those. But we know that the Jesus that we have come to know is greater than anything that we have left behind, greater than the angels, greater than Moses, greater. He is our great high priest. Why would we turn anywhere else? I'm going to ask you to stand. We're going to have a time of decision. We're going to open up our prayer rooms. Maybe you would like somebody to pray with you, to pray for you today. Maybe you have a decision to make. Maybe you would like for us to pray for you as a body of believers. But I would just ask that as you bow your head, that would be the first question you would ask. Heavenly Father, why would I go anywhere else? Would you pray with me?